it's time now to have that conversation on matters climate change and also the intersection with gender-based violence. And of course, even as we near the festive season, it's a season that some cases of GBV are experienced, and therefore it's also our just interest to have that conversation in order to just help people to get through this period. And I am joined by Mombi, who is just let me let you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Mombi Mugo. I work at HIVOS Foundation as a program officer for a project that is very relevant to today's conversation. It's called Rural Women Cultivating Change, and we'll be talking more about the project and also having a conversation on the topic of the day.
Yeah, great. And even as you just bring us up to speed concerning what exactly is it that HIVOS does.
Okay, so HIVOS is an international development organization that works around social justice and human rights issues.
Yes.
I would say our business is really putting power in the hands of the people. So it's about empowering communities and societies and just, giving the voice to the people who need it the most so that they can hold leaders to account and giving agency to vulnerable communities and populations around the world. Yeah.
What are some of, just in numbers, what are some of the areas that you've really focused on? All right,
so in our current strategic plan, we have 3 focus areas. One is gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, where now we look at gender issues, we look at issues of inclusion and diversity. We also have a focus area on climate justice, where we talk about climate issues and advocate for justice in that sector. And we also have a focus area on civic rights in a digital age, where we look at the intersection between human rights and digital technologies in today's technological space. Yeah.
In terms of specific counties or countries that you've majored on and you've had successful initiatives, perhaps just bring us up to speed concerning that.
All right, so in Kenya, the project that we're implementing that we'll be talking about today is called Rural Women Cultivating Change, which is a project that is for rural women, hence the name Rural Women, right? So the project really focuses on empowering rural women in issues of agroecology and agriculture, but also building resilience in terms of response to SGBV and leadership pertaining agriculture. So we work with rural women, smallholder farmers, in the very remote areas of this country. So far, because we just started implementing last year, we are working in 4 counties.
Yes.
We are working in semi-arid counties. So we have Baringo, we have Laikipia, we have Nakuru, and we have Kitui. So that's where we are focusing our energies on at the moment. But the project is also being implemented in Ethiopia and Tanzania. But HIVOS is a global organization. So we have projects in the MENA region. We have projects in the Southern African region. We have projects and offices in West Africa. But for the Rural Women Cultivating Change, we are implementing in only 3 countries, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Yeah.
And it's just last week that we completed the 16 days against gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Perhaps just talk to us some of the initiatives that you're doing as a company to ensure that we fight gender-based violence.
Yeah, like I said, in this project, we are looking at the intersection between agriculture and SGBV, and also climate change and SGBV. We have just been churning out material to create awareness around those intersectionalities, because it is not something that is usually discussed a lot. And also, that nexus has not come out clearly. So we have, one of the things that we have been doing, we took it upon ourselves in the 16 days of activism, was to churn out material to just ensure that we create that awareness around those intersectionalities. And I think that's what we are here to talk about today. But also we had different regions where HIVOS works, where different staff were doing different activities. In Kenya, specifically for the Rural Women Cultivating Change project, we wrote a lot about the intersectionalities that our project has so far found in SGBV, agriculture, and climate change. Yeah.
And our topic majorly focuses on now the intersection between climate change and GBV. even before we get right into it, just talk to our viewers and just explain to us how those two link.
Okay. It's so much, but we can try to unpack it. All right. So, and I think I want to begin from what we have seen in our implementation so far, because we came up with these interventions because obviously we knew that there are underlying issues in societies where we are implementing our activities, and we came up with interventions for the women who are in these communities. And I would say so far, because we are right at the middle of implementing some of those interventions, we can already see where the nexuses exist and where the intersectionalities come in. And so, like I said, our focus is on agriculture, and we are working with women smallholder farmers in rural in economies in Kenya. And as you know, agriculture is the backbone of this country's economy, and not just in Kenya, but globally. In most developing countries, agriculture is usually the backbone of our economies. We have agriculture contributing to about almost 40% of our GDP by 2020. And then we have about 40% of the labor force in agriculture is women. So we have looked at how agriculture has transformed the lives of women so far. And these women in the rural areas who are really carrying the burden of this country's GDP and this country's economy, as well as food security. And we have seen that climate change has definitely affected agriculture a lot. And what is the impact of that when it comes to women and SGBV? And I think that is where the nexus is. This is not something that is usually talked about, but I'm happy to say that there are interventions now that you can see, even from government, from the just concluded COP28 in the UAE. You can see there are interventions that are really trying to link SGBV or climate change and SGBV. So, what we have experienced as a country and globally, we have seen the changes in weather patterns. We have seen even in the coastal communities who are likely to be affected by the rises in the sea. Fishing communities are going to be affected. So it's not just agriculture, but when you open it up to other areas that are being affected by climate change, you'll see that even communities who live around the ocean or around the sea, their fishing activities are also being interrupted. And this is the thing. Men and women are really affected by climate change. But why are we putting an emphasis on the women? Is because women suffer the most. They suffer double victimization when climate change occurs, or when consequences of climate change occurs to them, because women are already vulnerable in the societies. In our project, we have seen, women are not decision makers in their societies. They don't have leadership in their societies. Where we are working in those semi-arid counties, we have women with very poor literacy levels. Women, at household level, they don't have any decision-making power. At society level, they don't have any decision-making power. So, they're already vulnerable. They have no assets, they have no capacity whatever to negotiate with their governments or with their local leadership. They are poor. They don't have assets. And what we have seen is, so you can imagine you're already vulnerable, and then, we have, you have to counter consequences of climate change. So that has been a challenge. So we can get right into SGBV and how that interacts with the climate change. All right. So what we have seen so far, and I think this is a global phenomenon in all the countries around the world where we have had issues that have been brought about by climate change, be it hurricanes, whatever it is, tsunamis, etc., where there is, that interference in the normal lives of societies due to climate change, women have suffered the most. Number one, in the counties, especially where we work, and in Kenya, and I think around East Africa, we have gone through a very a busy year between 2022 and 2023. First, we had, like a very prolonged drought.
Yes.
And we also, the consequences of that drought and what it did. And then we had floods. Just the other day, we had El Nino. So it has been, trying to get that balance. And a few things have come out of that. So number one is when there was that prolonged drought, what happened is our rural communities who depend on agriculture, because 20% of Kenya's land mass is capable of farming, is land that can be farmed, and is land that is being farmed, and 80% of that depends on rainfall. So when we didn't have rainfall between 2022 2023, we saw loss of incomes for the rural communities who depend on agriculture.
Yes.
And what that did, because we have done surveys at household level to just understand what is it that is happening at that very bottom level coming up, is husbands will go into drinking because they are, there is no money, they are depressed. And there was a rise in intimate partner violence. Women suffered physical assault and sexual assault as well at that very minute level, at family level. We also saw children dropping out of school, young girls dropping out of school, because now what happens in such situations is that there is also an increase in unpaid care that the woman is supposed to do. So household chores become many. For example, this woman is now supposed to travel a longer distance to look for water. We all saw that in our national televisions, that they had to travel for longer distances, to look for water, to look for food for their families. And they were accompanied by young girls who consequently had to drop out of school to support their families in doing those chores.
Yes.
As a result, when women have to travel longer distances, they probably come back to their homes at night, maybe with water, maybe without. And as a result, in that movement, there were reports of women who are actually sexually assaulted, as they went to look to feed their families. The other thing, in those communities, there was a rise in FGM, because when incomes have been lost and households now are poor and there is no money and there is no food, those communities, of course, we know that there is early marriages, there is FGM, and so what they turn into is actually really selling those girls off to for marriage, so that they can get money, to buy food and basic needs for their families. So FGM was done on these girls, was done on these girls to prepare them for marriage. So there was also an increase in FGM during that season. And of course, now there was also an increase in early child marriages, as young girls were married off
And as he was, after just going through these households and getting all those case studies, what is it that you've been doing now to just make sure that people recover from that, or even to prevent that happening, if just in case, God forbid, another drought happens?
And it did not even stop at the drought. When we had floods, just the other day we had El Nino, there were also reports. I remember there was this one story of a woman in Tana River who had to swim to give birth. I don't know if you saw that. And because SGBV is not just about physical and sexual assault, it's also about access to socioeconomic services. And we have seen what also the floods have done to women. In most places where women are given shelter, they undergo violence in the shelters and the temporary homes that they are given. Also, access to services for women who are receiving aid from government or from donors, also that has been problematic. So what we have done is looking at the pillars of SGBV, looking at prevention, looking at prosecution, looking at provision of services. We have partners that we work with at the grassroots level, and we have mechanisms that we have put in place. So, you know, first is collection of data, because in this sector, in the SGBV sector, data has been very problematic. So you have interventions that are really not that are not tailored, or they're not advised by the current data that we have. So we have partners on the ground that we worked with to collect the data and also to provide psychosocial support to the victims of SGBV. We have partners in this project in those particular counties who are working on those particular counties. And, you know, just to provide, we have shelters. We have partners who have put up shelters where the women who are experiencing SGBV can, you know, go to, and while they are there, they receive psychosocial support. And also we try as much as possible to also build on access to justice. Yeah.
And let's just look at, because in the communities that you've mentioned, when you look at the likes of Baringo and even go to areas like Tana River, go to areas like Kajiado, most of them, they hold so much into cultural norms and stereotypes. So just talk to us how these holding too much onto cultural norms and the stereotypes around the communities are exacerbating the cases of gender-based violence in these communities.
Oh yeah, that's very true. In Baringo, for instance, it is, and you know, we acknowledge that those are cultures, those are norms that our interventions have found happening. They are cultures that have been there, you know, since a very long time. And a lot of organizations, the government itself, everybody has crafted interventions around just dealing with these norms and cultures. But I also want to acknowledge that it is not just, you know, like a one-day thing to just find a culture and do away with it. So yes, those cultures and norms that we have in those communities are really aggravating the issue of SGBV. And it has been very, very, very hard to counter them. You have, in those communities, you have areas where women cannot own land, yet they make up the hugest percentage of farmers, but they cannot own land. And where they farm, they cannot sell their farming produce, or they cannot market their produce. We also have situations where, when it comes to ownership of assets at household level, women can only own small animals like chickens and rabbits, while men take, the goats, the cows. So those norms are there, and they have been very hard. Of course, those norms are now, also increasing FGM rates, increasing the rates for early child marriages, and those norms have been there, and we have tried as much as possible to have interventions around changing attitudes, because that's where we start, by changing attitudes, so that, just so that once you have changed attitudes and the community can see that what they're doing is not beneficial, but it has not been easy. And I don't think it is like something that can be done in a day, or even in a year, or even in 2 years. But I think it's just about putting up structures in communities, for people to just see how destructive those cultures and those norms are. And for us who are implementing activities in those areas, or who have interventions around changing attitudes in those areas, to just keep at it without giving up, because sometimes it really gets rough.
Great. And just talk to us about ways in which gender inequalities intersect with the environmental degradation, also leading to increased vulnerabilities to violence to these women, girls, and even children.
I would say, if you look at the environment itself, women and women really rely on natural resources for basically everything, from washing clothes to farming to eating. Women really rely on natural resources. And so when there is an interference with the supply from nature, or when nature now decides, you know, something is going to happen, like a drought, like floods, and they can no longer access these natural resources, that has caused, you know, some bit of challenges in the lives of women as well. And that is why we're talking about this intersection, because it is something that has not been coming out clearly. So because we already have existing barriers to gender equality in our societies, so you can imagine that you already have women who cannot make decisions, women who cannot take up leadership, women who are illiterate or have, you know, low literacy levels. You have women who are overworked. You have women who are battered. You have women who are already suffering SGBV, and then where they depend on for their daily living, which is natural resources, they cannot access that, or there is an interference. So I would say that also environmental degradation and the existing gender inequalities have also aggravated the situation. And, you know, we cannot talk about, for example, farming and not talk about climate change. Yes. We cannot also talk about environmental degradation and also not talk about climate change as well. So I think those two have been actually the most obvious factors that have aggravated the issue.
Right. And of course, there's just a lot on this topic. And when you mentioned areas that you've been focusing on, one common factor is also the lack of access to education in most of these areas, the likes of Baringo. The cases we see of children who've teenage pregnancies are very high there, and therefore most of them are even forced to not go to school, or in communities where they are nomadic, you find these children are not able even to go to school because they have to look after the cattle. So what role do you think education and lack of access to education plays when it comes to matters GBV in these areas?
Yeah, like I said, we have seen reports of young girls dropping out of school and therefore, you know, not accessing education. For me, I think education is very important. And I think when these young girls are able to access education, of course, they are able to not be in harm's way when it comes to FGM and early marriages. But when they drop out of school, and as we have seen, because they have been dropping out of school to look after cattle, to look after their families, as their mothers go to look for food or water, some have to travel long distances to look for water, and so they accompany their mothers most of the time. We have also seen cases where this poverty or this climate change has brought about insecurity in places like Baringo. Then there are increased cases of cattle rustling, and you know, some of the people who take part in those are very young boys who are taking part in those conflicts. You also see that families have to move because of the conflict. They have to move from one area to another. But I feel like if these young girls and boys were in school, those things would not be happening to them. I feel like maybe if they did not have to drop out of school and they were, you know, they were in schools and functional schools, so to speak, then we wouldn't be having such high cases of FGM, early marriage, or have young boys taking part in those conflicts as well. So I think this issue of dropping out of school has also aggravated the issue and has increased our numbers in terms of FGM and early child marriages.
Okay, perfect. Of course, we'll be continuing this conversation after this short commercial break. I'm really enjoying the conversation, by the way, when you were talking about climate change and the intersection between climate change and SGBV.
Yeah.
I had no idea how we would go about it, but I see now how they're linked, and I hope you, our viewer, is also enjoying this. And of course, you can be part of this conversation at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Cafe, and we're having an interesting conversation here on matters climate change, as well as how that is linked to gender-based violence, focusing, of course, on several regions that HIVOS has been looking into. And in studio with me, I have Mumbi Mugo. We're back with the conversation. Of course, we've just mentioned a lot of it, but let's just look at what are some of the policies and programs focused on climate adaptation or disaster management, and how can they integrate measures to prevent and also respond to matters gender-based violence?
Okay. This is the thing. Climate change in itself is a multiplier of other underlying socio-political, economic tensions that we are experiencing in society. So we already have socio-political, economic tensions that we have in our communities. And then, so when you get climate change, it just becomes a multiplier of those tensions that we are already experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that we can make interventions, or we can come up with interventions or policies in isolation, mm-hmm. if we really want to alienate SGBV in communities, as pertaining SGBV. Because if you have poor agricultural policies, for instance, then it doesn't really make sense to have robust climate change policies, because they have to go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So my thinking is that we need to have interventions and policies that are sound, that are robust, right from legal frameworks around leadership of women, empower women, so that even when we have those situations, women are really able to bring out their issues. Numbers don't lie. And a lot of times when women are really not counted when it comes to collecting these data is because women are not able to bring out those issues. Mm-hmm. So policies around leadership of women, mm-hmm. Policies around agriculture, policies around improving the economic lives of women in those communities as well. And of course, lastly, is having a robust legal framework or policy framework around climate change. I think those are some of the interventions that would really help. Not to say that they don't exist, mm-hmm. they are there. Like in Kenya, for example, we have a sound legal framework around SGBV. We have the Sexual Offences Act. So we have different legal frameworks that look at different aspects of SGBV in Kenya. So for example, you have the Sexual Offences Act. Then you have the Prevention Against Domestic Violence Act. We even have the FGM Act. So we do have, and then we already have existing policies. So they are there, even in agriculture, in politics, in leadership of women. A lot has been done in this country. Mm-hmm. And we do have a sound legal framework, mm-hmm. and policies at county and national level. For me, I think implementation is the problem. And I think a lot of our efforts should be geared around implementing some of those policies and the legal frameworks to really benefit the communities. Yes. Yeah. Okay,
great. And when we speak of perhaps even matters floods, right now there's so many people who have been displaced. Their houses have been carried away by the floods, and you find people are moving now. So how does the displacement due to these changes in the environment affect women and even their security, and also exacerbate the cases of violence among women and also children?
Displacement is always a big thing for women and children, and it's very unfortunate. When women have to move, of course, they go to temporary setups, either that have been set up by donors or by government, either local or national. And in those places, first, there is no privacy. So you can just imagine the number of people who need those temporary shelters. And, there is no privacy. I was reading somewhere, and the thing is, whether the woman is sleeping, washing, bathing, there is violence that will occur, whether she's sleeping, bathing, or washing. So you can imagine. They are raped when they are sleeping. They are raped when they are bathing. They are raped when they are washing. So because there is no security in those setups, and the woman is already so exposed. So young girls can't go to school, or they have to travel long distances between these temporary shelters and where the school is. And in that moment between the school and the camp, there's violence that occurs there, mostly sexual violence. So for me, displacement, we really have to think about what are some of the mechanisms that we can set in place for safety of women. If women have to be evacuated, for safety, whether it's because of floods or any other natural occurrence, do we have mechanisms in place, or do we even understand that it is not safe for women in some of those structures and setups? And because I feel like when some of these things are done, there's nobody thinking about that woman and her safety and the privacy that she needs, which of course they don't get in those shelters. If you do some bit of reading, you will see that even in our refugee camps, a lot is happening to women. There is a lot of SGBV cases, whether rape, sexual assault on young girls and women in those camps. So I imagine it would be the same. If you're evacuating women for safety because of floods and you don't put mechanisms to ensure that women are not only sheltered, but they are also safe. So putting their safety and security first, even as and it's good, it's commendable, that we are evacuating, but can we stop for a moment to think about the safety and security of these young girls and women?
Yeah. And just what role do you think NGOs, international organizations, and also the likes of HIVOS can play when it comes to now just reducing these cases of gender-based violence and also matters climate change mitigation? Okay.
I think number one is already issues are coming up around SGBV and climate change.
Yes.
And because this is a thing that was not there in the past, I think it is now upon us to come up with interventions, around climate change, but also putting other lenses, like an SGBV lens to climate change, like a gendered approach to climate change, and set up interventions that link the two, because that has been missing. The other thing I think we can do is also creating awareness,
yes,
and civic education. For example, there is a lot that is happening in the climate change space. There is conversations around just transitions. There is conversations around climate financing. All those conversations that are happening in that world, women need to be part of those conversations. So I think it is upon us to conduct civic education and create awareness on some of those ongoing conversations and demystify for the rural woman, or for any woman, who is being affected most by climate change, what those conversations mean for them, and how they can be part of those processes. Sometimes when you say climate change, it is such a big conversation, but we need to begin unpacking it for the women that we are working for them to understand what is happening and to be part of those processes. So I think there is a lot of awareness creation. And the other thing that we can do is also bring women to leadership positions at that level. And I really like what we are doing at HIVOS, because we are focusing on the rural woman, and we are building her to take leadership in their communities at the rural level. So therefore, I think when we have women who are leading at that level, yes, not in national politics, local politics, then you have women who are really crafting the women's agenda at that local level. And when there are interventions around occurrences that have been brought about by climate change or natural disasters, women are able to say, these are our issues, we should be listened to, and these are some of the things that we think, even as government is addressing and bringing this aid, these are the women's issues, and this is the women's agenda. So I think those are some of the interventions, or some of the things that we can do. But also, most importantly, is how do we ensure that our government is implementing the legal frameworks that exist, yes, the policies that exist, implementing it to support the people. So also a lot of implementation of laws and policies.
And just in terms of building even policies that are gender responsive, what role do you think, or how can humanitarian groups ensure that they put up policies and strategies that are gender responsive in order to protect these vulnerable groups in disaster affected areas?
Yeah. One of the things we have discovered is that we do have laws and policies, especially when you look at what devolution has done. It was meant to bring power close to the people. And so we do have policies that exist at county level, policies that exist at county level, but then they are not inclusive. They are not inclusive because women did not participate in the making of these policies or these laws. Women were not involved. So one of the things that we can do is ensure that women are at the decision-making table. When these laws and policies are being formulated, women are part of the process. And also the other thing that has been lacking is data. So we have policies that are not backed by data. And this is gender data, data on issues affecting women, disaggregated by gender, but also goes further down to look at, different demographics of women, women disabilities, women, single female-headed households, for instance, because they have different challenges. So I think in this gender equality conversation is also not just looking at gender or as women as a homogeneous community, but being very deliberate about going down to look at the different calibers of women that we have and the different demographics of women that we have, and coming up with policies that are very inclusive and that do not leave any woman behind.
Great. And even as Hivos, I know you focus on mostly the rural areas and also make sure that your campaigns are at the grassroots level. So how do you think even empowering more community-based organizations at the grassroots level can help in matters climate change mitigation, as well as even being able to coexist with SGBV survivors?
Yes, what has come out clearly in the period of time that we have had interventions at the rural level is that those CBOs, when we call them rural development organizations, they play such a key role in transforming rural economies than we thought in the beginning. And I think it is up to us to really empower them. Like you have CBOs at that level who are really collecting data on SGBV. You have them as fast responders when we have issues, when we have a case on GBV. You have them as the organizations who are leading the prosecution process, and they really understand the justice system, and they really do a lot at that level. So we will continue empowering them and working with them, financing them, of course, because they need the resources. But we have seen that they are playing such a key role in not just climate change conversations and demystifying that and bringing access to information close to their communities, but also in responding to SGBV, in helping with access to justice and prosecution of those cases, and also most importantly, collecting data. Yeah.
And what are you doing as Hivos to ensure that you create awareness and also just educate people in matters reducing the emissions around their environment in order to protect not only women but also just people who exist within that area?
Yeah, one of the things we are doing is we are champions of agroecology, which is sustainable farming. That is one of the things that we are doing. It's clean farming, sustainable farming, and we are mostly doing this with women. The other thing we are doing is we are running media campaigns just to create that awareness, and we have a lot of trainings. We have policy dialogues with the farmers to create awareness on the existing policies that are affecting them. And we also have partners, like I said in the beginning, we work with partners at the grassroots level who are also carriers of this information, who can bring this information in the language that those communities understand. Those are some of the interventions that we are doing at that local level.
Great. And just in terms of ensuring that men are also part of these processes.
Yeah.
What role do men and boys also play now when it comes even to just curtailing these harmful gender issues?
Yeah, you know, in those communities, and I don't think it's just in those communities, but even where I come from, and in our societies, even in the urban areas, because we have seen SGBV is not just happening in the rural areas, it's also happening in urban areas.
Yes.
But it is a taboo. It is talked about in whispers, and you know, and suffered in silence, for sure. So I would say that what we are doing and the role of men is, you know, for every woman who is suffering sexual or physical violence, there is a man behind it.
Yes.
So it has been about bringing the men on board on these conversations, and we have what we call male champions. So those are men who have been liberated, quote unquote. And you know, and they see the value of upholding the dignity of women at that level. You know, they don't partake in SGBV. They are our champions against SGBV. And they have really been useful because it is one thing to keep talking to the women alone who are the victims, and I think it's another thing to really involve men who are the perpetrators of this violence. So we have been having conversations with men as well, and we have programs that are tailor-made for men, so that the more we have male champions who are speaking against SGBV, the more then we have, or we have reduced cases of SGBV in those communities. So we are now looking at prevention, the prevention part, the prevention pillar of SGBV, and it's just about bringing men to be champions against SGBV, and it has worked. Yes. Of course, it's very difficult to bring up those conversations in some communities because it's taboo. Yes. To have those conversations, and especially to bring men on board because of the cultures and the norms. But in counties where we have succeeded, we have groups of men who we call our male champions, who have really helped us with preventing SGBV. And they have also been mentoring young boys so that when they grow into men, we have at least some change of attitude around the role of women in society and also in our homes, that women are not commodities, women cannot be commodified. They are not assets, they are not children, that they are actually human beings with dignity that needs to be respected and upheld. Yeah.
Great. And just speaking of male champions, it reminds me there was a time in Tana River, and there are these male champions who are trying to just champion against gender-based violence, as well as even help women in communities where they are unable to access healthcare services, even in terms of giving birth. And the major challenge is the stigmatization even of these men as they try to break the norms and help these women. So as just speak to us, even as we conclude, speak to us on some of the projects that you're currently working on as HIVOS.
It is true that these men really face stigma. So you can imagine, it's like, you know, it's a fight against all odds, because most of the men are the perpetrators of this violence. So you who has chosen yourself as a champion against this cultural norm that we have known, you know, since time immemorial, then, you know, they face the stigma. But we have continued working with them and having interventions that are tailor-made for men, for male participation. And we have seen, you know, a change of attitude. It's slow, and it has not been easy, I must say. But we have seen some level of stability in terms of numbers of the men who are becoming male champions in those communities. And it's just, I don't think it's something that we can deal with in one day. But at least there is some steady growth, and there is some very good progress in that.
Okay, great. Just speak to us on the projects that you're currently working on as HIVOS.
Okay, so like I said, we have 3 focus areas. So we have gender equality, diversity and inclusion, where the Rural Women Cultivating Change projects currently sits. Currently, that's the only project that we're implementing in the country. but we are working with 2 other partners. We are working with Growth Kenya, who are very big on SGBV as well, and leadership. We're also working with Seed Savers Network, who are also very big on seed saving and agroecology. Yes. So those are the 3 organizations that we're implementing the Rural Women Cultivating Change project with. We do have other projects, but they are global projects. So they're in other countries. We have Free to Be Me, we have the We Lead, all programs that are focusing on gender equality and inclusion. We have projects that are focusing on climate justice. We have Voices for Climate Action, who are working on climate justice as well. So yeah, we do have those projects and programs that really speak into each other. So if you look at what our focus areas are, it's about what we were discussing today, the intersectionalities between gender, for example, and climate justice. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. And how can people perhaps find you?
All right, so I think on social media,
yes.
HIVOS is on all social media platforms, and we also have a very accessible website where we have very good information on what the organization does, where we work, who we are, what our values are, what our strategic plan, our strategic compass says, and more details into the specific projects, because like I said, we work in many regions around the world, MENA region, West Africa, East Africa. So this is the Eastern African hub that is based here in Nairobi. We have projects in Uganda and Tanzania as well. So I think if anybody wants to find out more information about HIVOS, they can come to our website. I think we can paste it. Yeah. And they will find all the information that they need on our work and who we are.
Okay, perfect. Your parting shot?
My parting shot is, I think there is a lot of intersectionalities between SGBV and climate change that are not being talked about. And I think moving forward, we really need to be careful about how we craft interventions as civil society organizations, as organizations in this space or in the SGBV space. Yes. One of the challenges that has been there is the lack of coordination, either at government level, at national or county, but also as civil society organizations. So you have people who are really working on SGBV and others on climate change, but we are not really coming together to look at how do these two intersect and what is the nexus. So we must, moving forward, we must furnish or we must look at our interventions and sharpen them to ensure that we really